Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're really cutting through the noise on a conflict that just dramatically escalated, redefining global tensions. We're talking about the recent direct military clash between Iran and Israel. And this isn't just another news story, as it feels like a seismic shift, moving away from what were, largely shadow skirmishes into, well, open warfare. Our mission today is to try and unpack the key developments, get a handle on the immense human and infrastructural cost, and maybe explore some of the global implications of this new phase. We've got a stack of fresh sources here, and we're going to distill the absolute most important nuggets of knowledge to get you well informed fast.
Absolutely. And while the headlines obviously grab your attention, our goal here is to give you that broader view, connecting the dots, really, on the origins, the devastating impacts on, well, both sides, frankly, and what the future might hold. We
Yeah.
want to help you understand not just what's happening, but critically why it matters to the wider world and, yeah, specifically to you.
Okay, so let's dive straight in then. Let's get into the events themselves. The data we've reviewed, it seems to point to a really distinct turning point. Operation Rising Lion. That was June 13th, 2025. This was Israel's major preemptive air campaign. What exactly were they aiming for with such a bold move, and how does that shift things from those earlier skirmishes?
Right. What's particularly critical here is that these strikes reportedly hit something like 100 Iranian sites. We're talking nuclear, missile, and military facilities, big
Sure.
locations like Tehran, Isfahan, Natanz. And our sources suggest significant damage, especially to the Natanz enrichment facilities and the Iraq heavy water reactor, so not just symbolic targets. And crucially, these operations also reportedly killed senior IRGC figures, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, military leaders too, including two major generals, according to reports, and maybe even nuclear scientists. That signals a profound shift, doesn't it?
A direct blow like that, yeah.
It's a clear move away from just containment. Seems like they're actively trying to dismantle Iran's military capacity, maybe even leadership. That's the key insight, I think, the scale, this new red line.
Wow. That's an incredibly aggressive target list. Definitely marks a new phase. And Iran's response, it was swift, substantial, called Operation Severe Punishment. Hmm. What was the strategic thinking there? I mean, deploying specific missile types on such a large scale, what does that tell us beyond just, showing strength?
Well, Iran hit back hard with a massive barrage. Sources say somewhere between 400 and 450 plus ballistic missiles and drones across Israel. And specific types are mentioned: Fatah, Khorramshahr, Sejil. These aren't just small rockets. The sheer volume and the specific missiles used, it demonstrates a clear intent, to overwhelm Israeli defenses, inflict real damage, not just send a message.
So, a really direct, large-scale counterattack.
Exactly. Targeting Israeli territory itself. It shows a significant escalation in their own deterrence doctrine. They're showing their hand, in a way.
Okay, so the military tit for tat is clear. But while those strikes get the headlines, our sources dig into something maybe even more important and, frankly, heartbreaking: the human cost and the damage to infrastructure. It seems immense on both sides. Let's start with Iran's civilian losses. What are the reports saying?
Yeah, this is grim. On the Iranian side, independent reports point to fatalities somewhere between 600 and maybe nearly 700. And a significant number of those, 200 to over 260, were civilians. The Israeli strikes, yes, they hit military bases, nuclear sites, energy facilities, but critically, they also damaged civilian power grids.
Yeah.
And what's really insightful here, beyond just the numbers, is this Iranian exodus our sources describe. Tens of thousands apparently fleeing Tehran, heading north.
Panic, just fleeing the capital.
Right. It tells you something about the sudden fragility of just normal life, of civil capacity when under direct attack like this. It's a rapid breakdown of trust and safety you don't often see happen so quickly, especially in a major city.
That's a really stark picture.
Yeah.
Okay, and turning it around, what about Israel's losses from Iran's retaliation?
Israel confirmed 24 fatalities and injuries between 240 and maybe 270 plus.
Yeah.
Again, many civilians among them. The Iranian strikes hit civilian facilities directly. For example, the Soroka Medical Center in Beersheba took a missile hit. Damaged his surgical wing, started a fire.
A hospital.
Yeah, thankfully they had evacuated that wing, so no confirmed deaths there, but still.
Yeah.
A direct hit on a hospital, and a school in Holon was hit. Luckily, no kids were there, schools were closed, but apartments nearby were damaged. Residential high-rises too, especially near Tel Aviv, Ramat Gan, Shrapnel damage, injuring dozens.
So really, civilian space is directly in the line of fire on both sides. Just awful consequences. And our sources also mention Israeli citizens sheltering nightly in places like train stations, malls.
That's right. It paints this really chilling picture of daily life under threat,
Mm.
a constant fear of missile barrages, almost unimaginable for many of us, right?
Yeah.
That constant strain.
Yeah, absolutely. So, given this scale, these ripple effects must be going global. What are our sources telling us about the international reaction and any diplomatic moves happening?
Oh, definitely global alarm. You're seeing warnings against further escalation coming from, well, pretty much everywhere. Russia, Turkey, China, the EU, the UN, the US. And the IAEA, UN's nuclear watchdog, they've specifically voiced concern about the attacks on the nuclear sites, understandably.
Are there any actual concrete diplomatic channels opening up, trying to de-escalate this?
Yes, it seems so. The material we've looked at shows European ministers are actually meeting with Iran's negotiator, Rosati, in Geneva today, June 20th. There's also talk maybe of a U.S. envoy getting involved in Oman.
Okay.
The immediate goal seems pretty clear. Try to get ceasefires, find some kind of framework for maybe a new nuclear agreement, just trying to find an off-ramp, you know? The urgency is palpable.
But then you have President Trump reportedly considering U.S. military involvement within 2 weeks. That throws a huge complication into the mix. For listeners following this, what might actually trigger the U.S. to intervene directly? Are there clear red lines our sources point to?
Well, the U.S. has already beefed up its naval presence in the Mediterranean. That's step one. But what's really significant and tricky is this added layer from Iranian proxies, particularly in Iraq. They've apparently threatened U.S. bases there if Washington jumps in.
Right.
So it creates this incredibly delicate balance. Any direct U.S. action risks widening the conflict massively. It's a huge decision.
And meanwhile, we're also seeing human rights groups weighing in on the legality of some of these actions.
Indeed. Reports indicate human rights watchdogs have accused both sides, actually, of violating international law. Israel, accused over the attacks on civilian sites in those nuclear facilities. Iran, accused for targeting hospitals like Soroka.
So intense scrutiny.
Yeah, it underlines how these actions are being judged on the world stage.
Okay, looking ahead then. Our sources map out a few potential pathways, significant implications. It feels like a really critical moment, balancing, more escalation versus diplomacy. What are the likely next steps?
Analysis suggests Israel is probably going to intensify its strikes, trying to degrade the Iranian regime's resilience, set back its nuclear program further. Iran, in turn, is likely to continue its missile and drone attacks, maybe even enhance its proxy activities, lean into that deterrence doctrine more. It could settle into a more prolonged, grinding conflict.
And the U.S. decision.
That Washington decision on military involvement, yeah, that's expected soon. And it will be a massive factor for regional stability. Whichever way it goes, European diplomacy might manage a pause, temporary or maybe longer, but sources suggest that really depends heavily on Iran making concessions, especially on enrichment. That's still the core issue, isn't it?
Always comes back to enrichment. Beyond the direct fight, what about those regional ripple effects and the humanitarian side? What should we be watching?
Well, you could see continued, maybe even escalating, proxy confrontations between Iran and the U.S. across the region. That ratchets up tensions everywhere. Critically, disruptions to oil shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. That could send global prices spiking.
Which hits economies worldwide.
Yeah, that affects everyone.
Exactly.
And on the humanitarian front, Israel's hospital system is clearly strained. The civilian evacuations in Iran are ongoing. Plus, there's deep concern about violence spilling over into Gaza, the West Bank, and the risk to aid routes, which are already incredibly fragile in the region.
Right. And finally, let's circle back to that strategic nuclear question. These Israeli strikes, will they significantly set back Iran's timeline for developing a bomb?
RAND analysts we looked at suggest yes, it will cause a delay. But, and this is important, probably not a full stop. And here's the critical nuance, the potential unintended consequence. Our sources indicate this kind of delay might actually push Iran to double down, maybe move its enrichment efforts further underground.
Making it harder to track.
Exactly. Harder to monitor, harder for future strikes to be effective. It raises that tough question. Does delaying a program like this just make it harder, more dangerous to contain in the long run?
So, bringing this all together then, our deep dive today, it really reveals a conflict that's already cost, well, over 1,300 lives across both sides. Civilians, military personnel, we've seen major damage to critical infrastructure, hospitals, schools, homes, the sensitive nuclear sites. Life-saving evacuations, like at the hospital, prevented some worse tragedies, thankfully. But the strain on ordinary people, on civilian systems, it just continues. It's immense. Diplomatic efforts are happening, but the outcome is really uncertain, and that crucial U.S. decision looms very large.
Yeah, and if you connect this to the bigger picture, these aren't just localized events. The spillover could profoundly reshape security across the Middle East. It impacts global energy markets, like we said, and maybe even the future of nuclear strategy globally. It's changing fast, and the consequences could be really long-term, demands careful attention.
We really hope this deep dive has given you, our listeners, a clearer, maybe more nuanced understanding of what's happening. It's complex, it's vital.
And as you reflect on all this, maybe consider this question. In this era of just constant, rapid information flow, especially when events like this unfold so quickly, how do we as individuals best sift through it all, discern the critical facts, truly grasp the implications? What stands out most to you from everything we've discussed today? Something to think about.